After the doom of Valyria, the exiled Targaryens became the last of their kind, the last dragonlords in the world. From the loins of Gaemon the Glorious and Daenys the Dreamer, a succession of Targaryen lords ruled on Dragonstone for over a century, dominating trade on Blackwater Bay thanks to their close allies, the Velaryons and Celtigars, while gazing out to the east, to the homeland they had lost. But the coming of Aegon Targaryen would bring this idleness to an end. He was the eldest son and second child of Lord Aegon Targaryen and his lady wife, Valyria Velaryon. He had two siblings, the stern and fearsome Visenya, and the cheerful and free-spirited Rhaenys. Since the days of old Valyria, it was customary for the dragonlords to marry brother to sister to keep the bloodlines pure. Yet Aegon married not one, but both of his sisters. It was said that while Visenya won his hand out of duty, it was Rhaenys who truly held his heart. All three siblings were dragonlords, commanding the last remaining dragons since the Doom. Each were named after the ancient gods of old Valyria. Visenya, the eldest of the three siblings, rode Vhagar, the smallest of the dragons, though she could still devour a horse whole. The youngest, Rhaenys, rode Meraxes, a beautiful silvery beast with golden eyes. And Aegon rode Balerion the Black Dread, who was the youngest of the 5 dragons that came to Dragonstone with Aenar the Exile a century ago. But by Aegon's time, he was the largest of the dragons to ever soar the skies of Westeros. After his triumph over the Volantines in the east, Aegon returned his sights towards the west. For years, he and his sisters traveled throughout the 7 kingdoms, exploring the Reach and perhaps even the Westerlands as well, ostensibly visitors to the regions. Even before he launched his invasion, Aegon ordered the construction of a great table carved in the shape of the continent. This massive slab of wood would be known as the Painted Table, a great map painted to show all the mountains, woods, meadows, and castles of Westeros. Yet, it had no borders to mark the other realms, a sign of his vision of a unified Westeros under one rule, one king. But why would he risk invasion? Most believed that Aegon looked across Blackwater Bay from Dragonstone and saw rich land ripe for conquest. But others claimed that ambition alone did not drove him to war, but a dream. It is said that he inherited the same gift of foresight that Daenys the Dreamer possessed when she saw the Doom a century ago. Whatever Aegon saw, it persuaded him to bring all of Westeros under a single rule. Whether it be dreams or aspirations, it was beyond dispute that Aegon Targaryen was determined to conquer the entirety of Westeros, no matter the cost. Against him stood 7 quarrelsome kingdoms, kingdoms that were often at war with each other. First was the North, a frigid, icy realm that stretched from the swamps of the Neck all the way to the Colossal Wall, from the Sunset Sea to the Shivering Sea. It is the largest of the 7 realms, though the least populated due to its harsh climate and bitter winters. Though petty kings once ruled in the north, it was the Starks of Winterfell who unified them all as the Kings of Winter and the Kings in the North. Of all the 7 kingdoms, the North alone stood against the Andal invasions, keeping their faith in the old gods. The king of the north at the time was Torrhen Stark. Its southern counterpart was Dorne. Like the north, Dorne was a harsh land, but in place of ice and snow, it contains wide deserts, dangerous coasts, and high red mountains. It is a parched land, save for those within the mountains or the regions watered by the green blood, Vaith, and Scourge. It was a patchwork of various warring kingdoms until the coming of Nymeria and her Rhoynar. When she married the ambitious Mors Martell, they subdued the petty kings one by one, until at last they brought all of Dorne under their rule. But this realm was not a kingdom, but a principality, in keeping of the old Rhoynish style. Another trait borrowed from the Rhoynar was that women were included in the Dornish laws of succession, holding equal status with men. The Martells have thus maintained their hold over Dorne for centuries, often contending with the Reach and the Stormlands in various border wars. When Aegon Targaryen's gaze fell on Westeros, the ruling princess of Dorne was Meria Martell, an aged, fat woman whom her enemies mockingly named the Yellow Toad of Dorne. The richest kingdom in Westeros was the Kingdom of the Rock, who held sway over the gold-rich Westerlands. It is a land of rugged hills west of the continent, from the Sunset Sea to Ironman's Bay. The Westerlands holds vast gold and silver mines lying underneath the ground, making its lords wealthy and powerful. But the most powerful of them all were the Lannisters of Casterly Rock, the descendants of the cunning rogue Lam the Clever. As kings, they warred against the Riverlands, the Storm Kings, and the Iron Men of the Isles, though they would often war against the Reach as well. At the time of Aegon's arrival in Westeros, the reigning king of the Rock was Loren the First Lannister, who would be later known as Loren the Last. Their greatest rival was the Kingdom of the Reach, the second wealthiest realm. It dominates the southwest part of the continent, watered by the River Mander. The Reach borders Dorne via the Red Mountains, the Stormlands in the east, and the Westerlands to the north. It is the breadbasket of Westeros, for it's the most fertile region in all the land. This kingdom claims an ancient connection to the first High King of the First Men, Garth Greenhand. His firstborn son, Garth the Gardener, raised Highgarden along the Mander. It became the seat of House Gardener, who ruled the Reach for many centuries, in times both prosperous and tumultuous. By the time of Aegon's conquest, Mern IX ruled the Reach, presiding over the largest army in Westeros, with many sons and grandsons to secure his line. In the east, House Arryn ruled over the mountainous region of the Vale as the Falcon Kings. The Arryns are among the oldest and purest line of Andal nobility, and the Vale was the first region the Andal invaders landed when they fled Andalos. They displaced the High Kings of House Royce and ruled the Vale from their mountainous stronghold of the Eyrie. Their reach extended from the Mountains of the Moon all the way to the Three Sisters, islands where they would contend with the men of the North, until finally emerging as the victors. The ruler of the Vale at the time was the boy king Ronald Arryn, with his mother, Shara Arryn, acting as regent. West from there lies the Riverlands, the beating heart of Westeros. It is so named by the three great banks that flowed along the mighty Trident, the Green Fork, the Red Fork, and the Blue Fork. It has been the site of many battlefields for centuries, with countless river kings rising and falling from enemies both within their own borders and without. It was only when Arlen III Durrandon of the Stormlands conquered the Riverlands did their own native rule came to an end. The Storm Kings reigned over the Riverlands for centuries, until they were driven out by the men of the Iron Islands, a race of fearless sea-roving warriors under their bloodthirsty king, Harren Hardhand. The Ironborn ruled over the men of the Trident with an iron hand for generations. The grandson of the Hardhand, King Harren the Black, ordered the construction of a mighty seat for himself. He drained the wealth of the Riverlords to finance this great endeavor and employed the use of captive thralls to labor on his monstrous castle, which in time would bear his name, Harrenhal. It is said that the last stone was set on the very day the Targaryens landed in Westeros. But the most belligerent kingdom of Aegon's time was the kingdom of the Stormlands. It is a realm of tumultuous storms and gales, which stretches from the Raidwood all the way to the Dornish marches that lie within the shadow of the Red Mountains and borders the Kingdom of the Reach, from Shipbreaker Bay to the Sea of Dorne. The kingdom's roots can be traced back to the construction of Storm's End, a formidable redoubt raised by the hero king during Godsgrief to stand against the gods of sea and wind. His descendants, the Durrandons, conquered the Stormlands and moved their boundaries even farther, from the Blackwater Rush all the way to the Riverlands. But due to their harsh climate, they were thinly peopled, and so the Kingdom of the Storm dwindled over time. The last of the Durrandons was Argilac the Arrogant, an old but fierce warrior king, with his only heirs being his maiden daughter, Argella. It was Argilac who woke the dragon's fury. The old Storm King wanted a powerful ally against Harren the Black and reclaim the Riverlands that his Iron Men had stolen. And so, he reached out to the Targaryens of Dragonstone, offering the hand of his maiden daughter to Lord Aegon, along with a dowry of lands beyond the Blackwater, lands he did not actually have. But Aegon rejected the offer, for he already had 2 wives and had no need for another. Instead, he offered the princess's hand to his closest friend and champion, Orys Baratheon. The Storm King rose in fury at the offer, for Orys was said to be the bastard half-brother to Aegon, and viewed it as an insult to his daughter. His reply was a box and a note.
"These are the only hands your bastard shall have of me."
And in it were the hands of Aegon's envoys. In response, the Lord of Dragonstone summoned his allies and vassals to attend him. The Velaryons and Celtigars heeded his call, as did 2 nominal vassals of the Storm King, the Lords Massey and Baremon, who had greater ties to Dragonstone. 6 days of debate followed, and on the 7th, thousands of ravens flew to all the lords and kings of the land. They all carried a single message.
From this day forth, there would be but one king in Westeros. Those who bent the knee to Aegon of House Targaryen would keep their lands and titles. Those who took up arms against him would be thrown down, humbled, and destroyed.
Not long after, Aegon and his sisters mounted their dragons and crossed Blackwater Bay with a small army of 3,000 strong, though some say it was only in the hundreds. They landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, where 3 hills rose above a small fishing village. There the Targaryens erected a primitive timber fortress at the highest of the hills, which in time would be known as Aegon's High Hill, while the wooden palisade came to be known as the Aegon Fort. From there, Aegon's forces proceeded to gain control over the surrounding lands and keeps. This was a disputed land, where it would be traded between Harren and Argilac's domains. But in the fullness of time, this area would be known as the Crown Lands. Most lords submitted peacefully, but the Darklands of Duskendale and the Mootons of Maidenpool made common cause and moved against the invaders' position. Their 3,000 men were met by an army of similar size, led by Orys Baratheon himself, while Aegon swept down upon Valyria. Both lords were slain in the battle that followed, and their successors swiftly surrendered and bent the knee. Once he displayed his power, Aegon summoned all his conquered lords to the Aegon Fort. There he was crowned by Visenya, with a Valyrian steel crown studded with blood-red rubies, and hailed as the king of all Westeros by Rhaenys, in a ceremony witnessed by only a small gathering of petty lords and knights. And there he displayed his war banner, a red three-headed dragon breathing fire on a black field. Though the dragonlords of old Valyria had never used such heraldic banners, these arms would be carried by Aegon's descendants for generations to come. Once they saw him as one of their own, the lords laid their swords at Aegon's feet and swore fealty. The new king raised them up and confirmed them in their lands and titles, while bestowing honors and offices to his oldest supporters. The Lord of the Tides, Daemon Velaryon, was made Lord Admiral and the first Master of Ships, in command of the royal fleets. Crispian Celtigar was made Master of Coin, in charge of taxation and economic affairs. Tristan Massey was made Master of Laws, examining the laws and customs of the realm. And above them all stood Orys Baratheon, whom Aegon proclaimed his shield, his stalwart, his strong right hand. And thus, a bastard became the first hand of the king, the second most powerful man in the realm. In response to this brash act, the rulers of the Seven Realms prepared for war. But for Dorne and the Vale, they sent overtures of support, but as allies, not vassals. Aegon rejected them both and divided his host in 3 forces, each accompanied by dragons. Orys took the main bulk of the army to the Stormlands with Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes, while the new Lord Admiral, Daemon Velaryon, led the Targaryen fleet against the Vale, with Queen Visenya accompanying them on Vhagar. And King Aegon and Balerion marched against Harren the Black with a smaller host. All 3 forces encountered resistance from their foes. At the Battle of Gulltown, 2/3 of the Targaryen fleet was sunk or taken by the Arryn fleet, augmented by Brovosi's sails, as well as claiming the life of Lord Velaryon. The Storm King's bannermen ambushed Orys Baratheon's forces in the rear, killing over 1,000 men, and Harren the Black's sons launched raids against Aegon's host. Yet these were but setbacks, and disaster was averted thanks to the Targaryen dragons. Visenya and Vhagar burned much of the Arryn fleet before retreating with the remnants of the royal fleet, while Rhaenys and Meraxes set the Rainwood ablaze, and Balerion the Black Dread burned the longships carrying Harren's victorious sons. And all the while, others saw opportunity in the Targaryen invasion. Pirates from the Stepstones began to plunder Argilac's holdings in the Stormlands. The three sisters broke away from the Vale and crowned Lady Marla Sunderland their queen. But the most threatening was in the Riverlands, where the Lords of the Trident rose up against Harren the Black under Edmund Tully, the Lord of Riverrun. Tully declared for the Targaryens, and the other River Lords joined him as they descended on the newly completed Harrenhal. Surrounded on all sides, Harren the Black prepared for a siege, but King Aegon called for a parley. Harren granted it, and with their banner bearers and maesters present, Aegon made his offer.
Yield now, and you may remain as Lord of the Iron Islands. Yield now, and your sons will live to rule after you. I have 8,000 men outside your walls.
What is outside my walls is of no concern to me. Those walls are strong and thick.
But not so high as to keep out dragons. Dragons fly.
I built in stone. Stone does not burn.
When the sun sets, your line shall end.
That night, Aegon and Valyrian descended upon Harrenhal from above and bathed the 5 massive towers in dragon fire. The Ironborn leapt from the battlements and burned. They cowered against the walls and burned. They fled in terror and burned. Stone might not have burned, but it turned the greatest castle in Westeros into the greatest oven, baking Harren and his last sons alive. Thus ended the Black Line, which had ruled the Ironborn for over 1,000 years. In the morning after Harren's fall, Aegon Targaryen forged a new Riverlands. He named Edmund Tully as the Lord Paramount of the Trident, making the other River Lords his vassals. They all swore fealty to the Targaryen king and to their new liege lord. For generations, the Riverlands were terrorized by their Ironborn overlords, but under the Tullys, they returned to peace and prosperity. When the fires had finally cooled within Harrenhal, Aegon ordered all the broken blades to be gathered up and sent back to the Aegon fort. All the while, Orys Baratheon's host continued to march against Argilac the Arrogant. Once he learned of Harren's end, Argilac roared in fury, refusing to die as he did, as some suckling pig cooked in his own castle. And so, he called his banners and marched against the invaders. In victory or defeat, he would meet his end the same way, with sword in hand. With the aid of Rhaenys and Meraxes, Orys learned of Argilac's numbers and dispositions, and dug on the high ground near Bronzegate. As the two armies clashed, a monstrous gale swept across the field, giving the battle its name, the Last Storm. It lasted for a day and a night, and would prove to be a bloody struggle. Argilac, however, pressed the attack, trusting in his numbers, for he had twice the knights and heavy horse. 3 times the Storm King led his knights against the Baratheon position, and each time they gained ground. But on the 4th, they met Queen Rhaenys and Meraxes, and the dragon's fire turned victory into chaos. Argilac himself fell from his horse, but he did not yield. When Orys met him in the field, he held off a dozen men with as many corpses at his feet. The Hand offered the king a final chance to surrender, but received only a curse instead. And so, the old warrior king and the young Hand fought for the destiny of a kingdom. In the end, Argilac got his wish and died with sword in hand. With their king dead, the Stormlords surrendered, granting victory to the invaders. Argilac's daughter, Argilla, attempted to hold Storm's End against the Targaryen host, even declaring herself the Storm Queen. Alas, her men lacked her resolve and brought her in chains before Orys Baratheon. But he treated the girl gently, even commemorating her father's valor in the last storm. And in a final act to honor the fallen king, he vowed to take the arms and words of the Durrandon for his own. Orys Baratheon thus became the Lord of Storm's End and the Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, with Argilla as his wife, and House Baratheon was born. Now in possession of 2 kingdoms, the remaining kings of Westeros saw the Targaryens as a true threat. Once more, Shera Arryn sent an offer to King Aegon, this time proposing marriage in exchange for her son becoming Aegon's heir. And in all that time, Torrhen Stark called his banners, though they would be slow in gathering. Yet even while the Lords of the North were gathering their strength, Mern the Ninth Gardener and Lorne the First Lannister joined forces and formed a formidable host, an army 55,000 strong, 5 times greater than Aegon's own. Mern the Ninth would call it their Iron Fist. The 2 kings, as they came to be known, moved northwest towards the Riverlands. King Aegon advanced to meet them, joined by his queens. His modest host met his foes on a plain south of the Blackwater Rush, near to where the Gold Road would eventually stand. The 2 kings were confident in their vastly superior numbers, but the plain they chose was dry, the grass parched, and the wheat ripe for harvest. Though the forces of the 2 kings pushed back the Targaryen forces, Aegon and his sisters unleashed their dragons and set the field alight. What followed has been known forevermore as the Field of Fire, the bloodiest battle in all of history. 4,000 men burned, another 1,000 fell to the sword, and tens of thousands returned home as charred monsters. But House Gardener never returned at all, for King Mern and his entire family were reduced to ash and bone. Loren Lannister only survived by escaping the carnage once he saw the battle lost. When he was captured a day later, the King of the Rock surrendered his crown at Aegon's feet and paid him homage. Many of his vassals followed suit, along with the surviving lords of the Reach. And so, Loren Lannister became the Lord of Casterly Rock, Shield of Lannisport, and Warden of the West. When the flames cooled, Aegon ordered all the broken swords to be rounded up and sent east. He then flew to Highgarden to secure it before a claimant could seize it for his own. At the time, the castle was held by Harlan Tyrell, the High Steward. He swiftly surrendered it to the Targaryen king without demur. In reward, Aegon named him the Lord of Highgarden, Warden of the South, and Lord Paramount of the Reach. At a stroke, the castle passed from kings to stewards, and the Tyrells became one of the greatest lords of Westeros. Yet the rise of the Golden Rose would lead to a slow decline in some of the oldest and noblest families of the Reach, those that had once commanded pride of place at the side of the Gardener kings. Among them, the Peaks of Starpike and the Osgreys of Standfast. From Highgarden, Aegon intended to continue his conquest in the south, but he soon learned of a new threat descending from the neck. Torrhen Stark had entered the Riverlands with an army of 30,000 savage northerners. Aegon sent word to his queens and vassals and raced north, astride Valyria. When King Torrhen arrived at the Trident, he found at its opposing bank the combined strength of all of Aegon's conquered kingdoms. Riverlords, Westermen, Knights of the Reach, Stormlanders, all had come. This force outnumbered Torrhen's by half, and above them all flew 3 great dragons. Torrhen had learned much and more about the burning of Harrenhal and the Field of Fire, and knew that if he crossed the Trident, his men would suffer similar ends. But most of his lords wished to press on regardless, trusting that northern valor would carry the day. Others wanted to retreat to Mcleod, the northern fortress that had thrown back scores of southern invasions. Even the king's bastard brother, Brandon Snow, offered to sneak into the enemy encampment at the dead of night and slay the sleeping dragons. Brandon was indeed sent across the Trident, but as an envoy, not a dragon slayer. After many correspondences, Torrhen Stark emerged the following day under a flag of truce and surrendered the crown of winter at Aegon's feet and swore to be his man. He knelt as a king and rose as Lord of Winterfell and the Warden of the North. Since that day, Torrhen Stark is remembered as the king who knelt. Yet none of his countrymen returned home scarred or burned, and the swords Lord Stark delivered to the Targaryens were neither twisted, melted, or bent. Once more, the Targaryens parted ways for their own separate campaigns. Visenya took flight on Vhagar and once more moved against the Vale. Queen Regent Shera and King Ronald had taken refuge within the Eyrie. It sat on high at the foot of the Giant's Lance, guarded by 3 way castles: stone, snow, and sky. But these were no barriers to a dragon. Vhagar landed unopposed in the castle courtyard, and when Queen Shera confronted them, she found the boy king on Visenya's knee. Ronald had begged his mother's leave to fly on her dragon. Shera had no choice but to submit to the Targaryen queen. She surrendered her coronet, her son's circlet, and the ancient falcon crown that the Arryns had worn for 1,000 years. In the end, Ronald Arryn got his promised flight, circling about the Giant's Lance 3 times, taking off as a king and landing as the Lord of the Eyrie, Defender of the Vale, and the Warden of the East, thus bringing the Vale of Arryn into Aegon's realm. Rhaenys, meanwhile, turned her eyes on Dorne. Like her sister, the queen chose not to engage the many watchtowers that laid along the Red Mountains. Instead, she flew Meraxes to secure the submission of the castles of Dorne. Yet no Dornish lord could be found, and none could say where they had gone. But at Sunspear, the ancient seat of House Martell, Rhaenys confronted the Princess of Dorne in her abandoned castle. The Yellow Toad may have been blind, fat, and old, but her wits remained as sharp as a dagger.
I will not fight you, nor will I kneel to you. Dorne has no king. Tell your brother that.
I shall, but we will come again, Princess. And the next time, we shall come with fire and blood.
Your words. Ours are unbowed, unbent, unbroken. You may burn us, my lady, but you will not bend us, break us, or make us bow. This is Dorne. You are not wanted here. Return at your peril.
And thus did Queen Rhaenys took flight on her dragon, and Dorne remained unconquered. To the west, Aegon Targaryen moved against Old Town, the greatest city in Westeros. It was home to 3 great monuments: the Starry Sept, where the High Septon ruled over the faith; the Citadel, where the Order of Maesters dwelt within, seeking knowledge and wisdom; and the massive High Tower, seat of the city's ruling family, House Hightower. When Aegon Targaryen arrived with an army, he steeled himself for battle. Instead, Lord Manfred Hightower yielded the city without bloodshed. As it happened, when the Targaryens landed in Westeros, the High Septon locked himself within the Starry Sept, fasting and praying for 7 days. On the 7th, he received a vision from the crone, a vision of blood and fire should Old Town oppose the dragons. This convinced the pious Lord Manfred not to take part in the fighting. Welcomed into Old Town with open arms, Aegon Targaryen was crowned a second time within the Starry Sept. Only a handful of lords were on hand to witness Aegon's first coronation, but now thousands looked on as the High Septon crowned the victorious king, proclaiming him Aegon, the first of his name, King of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. And thousands more cheered as their new king flew overhead on Valyrian's back. This brought an end to what historians would name Aegon's conquest, where all the 7 kingdoms were made as one by the will of Aegon and his redoubtable sisters. However, Dorne itself would continue to oppose the dragons for the next 2 centuries. The war had shown that no matter how large or high your castle may be, no matter how large an army you could field, none could stand against a dragon, for dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. Many believed and even hoped that Aegon would make Old Town his new royal seat, or perhaps on Dragonstone, the ancient seat of his house. But the king chose neither, electing to make his capital on the very site he and his sisters first landed on the soil of Westeros. This new town would bear the name King's Landing. From there, the king ordered the construction of a great seat made out of the broken and beaten blades of all his fallen enemies. For 59 days, scores of blacksmiths labored, until Balerion the Black Dread blasted it with his dark flames, transforming it into the Iron Throne, a throne fit for a conqueror. From this seat, the House of the Dragon would rule the newly forged 7 kingdoms for nearly 3 centuries, until the reign of the Mad King, Aerys II. Aegon Targaryen had written his name in the histories of Westeros. He achieved what only a handful of others tried and failed. He brought an entire continent to heel. Even time itself would bend its knee to him, for after his Starry Sept coronation, the Maesters would reset the calendar to before and after conquest. In the centuries to come, many sons of House Targaryen would carry his name. But Aegon, the first of his name, would always be remembered as Aegon the Conqueror and Aegon the Dragon.